In this video, we're going to start looking at the samples page down at the bottom here. So the samples page provides in-depth editing options in the same way as the chords page is for the chords, but this time it's for the samples. They're going to be used in each one of the sounds. And it allows you to create your own kind of complex layers and textures and edit the presets that you have within Playbox. So let's go through the elements that are located in this page. So first of all, we have the note display option, which is this little eye icon. Now, watch what happens when I click on this. You'll see you get note labels next to each one of the sounds. So it kind of corresponds to what we had in the chords page there. So it shows you the notes. Okay, so the next thing I want to look at is the actual chords themselves. So they are represented by these very nice looking kind of designed graphics for each one of the samples used in the sound or in the chord. So each one of these columns is the same as we had for the chords page. So the column represents, in this case, the notes, whereas for the samples page here, it represents the individual samples within the chord. Now this corresponds to the MIDI keyboard, as we know. You'll see we get the same slightly illuminated column. What a cool sound. It's very kind of interesting and quite kind of unique sounding. Very cool. So each one of these kind of very nice looking graphics here represents a different type of sound essentially. Now we'll come on and have a look at the visualization of what these represent in a second. Now up at the top here, we have the ability to randomize samples. Now what that means is it's going to randomize the samples that are located in whichever chord we're clicking on or whichever chord this little dice icon is above. So it's going to only randomize the samples for that chord. So let's try it for this one. You'll see it's changing the image here. And you can hear it changing the sound. They all sound very usable, which is cool. Now, when we're randomizing here, we're going to be using these categories here to randomize. So at the moment, we're working with bass. So we could say all, for example, and let's randomize. And now you see it's changed from that bass icon to be just random types of sounds, essentially. So we can use that functionality as well. You see now we've lost that low end because now it's replaced the bass with something else. Now let's say we wanted to randomize this chord as we've been doing. We didn't want to randomize, say, this sample here. You'll see that one's not going to change because we had that lock icon clicked. Now this is also going to work when we randomize all the samples as well. So you'll see here that we're randomizing everything. This chord here or this sample here is not changing because we had the lock icon switched on. Let's just go back and forth so we can reload that one. Now, as well as being able to lock individual samples, we can also open a browser to have a look at different samples to load in. Now, we're going to come back to that a little bit later on and look at this in a little bit more detail. Now, located up in the top right here, we have some mixer settings that allow you to change basic mixer settings for the different samples. We're going to come back to that. I'm going to look at that a little bit later on. Then we have undo and redo. So let's say we changed up this chord here. We can then undo that to return to the previous level, or we can redo. So that's quite useful. Now, let's say you wanted to have all the cubes locked. You just wanted to actually just change one. Well, you can actually lock all of the cubes, and then you could say take one off, and then it would just allow you to randomize that one single cube. So that's quite useful. Now we know about the randomize all samples because we've already been doing that. And now down at the bottom here, we have the sample set selector here. So we can just go through and quickly load up a different set of samples. So the chords will stay the same. But the samples will change, which is really cool. Now located along the bottom here, we have this spread control. Now this allows you to play all the samples within a specific chord and actually spread them out across all of the chords. We're going to come back to that and look at that in a little bit more detail. Now from here, as well as choosing sample sets, we could randomize sample set as well. Let's just undo that. And we know from previous experience, if we lock this, we can use the overall randomize, which is on the main page over here, but it won't actually randomize the samples. And then as we discovered earlier, along the left-hand side here, we have the ability to choose from sample categories to load in there. So you can see these categories here. We also have some user categories as well. And we can also randomize a whole row of samples as well. So as well as randomizing a specific chords sample sets, we can also just do, say, all the voices at once or all the basses by using these randomize options here as well. And when we're using these categories, we also have this option here, which allows you to basically determine whether each one of the rows here can have individual categories or whether they're going to follow this category here. So if we link it and we change, say, to be voices or instruments, and then we randomize, you'll see we're now randomizing within instruments. Let's put that to, say, bass. Randomize. Now we're only going to randomize within the bass category. Could get a bit muddy potentially. When we have this off, we can go back to randomizing using individual categories for the different rows here. Okay, so that's a kind of overview essentially of the samples page. And we're going to come back in the next video and revisit some of the deeper functionality here, like the mixer sets and the spread control here. But to recap in this video, we covered the functionality of the samples page, and we now know we can visualize the notes of a chord by clicking on this little eye here. These are our sample sets for each one of our chords stacked up like the chords were in the last few here. So this is notes being stacked up. In this case, we're stacking up the sample sets. We know that we can come on here and there's a sample selector for each individual sample. And we're going to come back to that in a little bit more detail. We can also lock a sample for a specific note of a chord if we want to. And then if we're randomizing from here, it's going to not affect the chord which is selected. We can lock all of our samples here and then potentially unlock whichever we wanted to change. And again, randomize. This is our randomize functionality. We had mixer settings up here. We're going to come back to undo and redo over here as well. The spread control allowing us to spread out some of these sample sets using a chord to have them appear on some different chords. And when we're randomizing, we're using these categories here. And the categories can either be separate for each one of these samples for a note of a chord, or we can link them so they just follow one category at the bottom. Randomization for individual chords and then randomization for individual categories essentially. We know we can select sample sets from here, randomize sample sets, and also lock to make sure that the sample sets remain the same when we're randomizing on the main page. Okay, so now we've covered that overview of the samples. In the next video, we're going to dive in and have a look at some of this functionality in a little bit more detail. So I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.